So, yeah, this right here, this is where it all started. Before the multiplayer, before the puzzles, before literally any texturing that wouldn't remind you of Doom, was this. A simple orb that you could flick on and off, quote unquote glyph on the wall that was supposed to be some sort of text but wasn't because I had no idea how a mission worked, and another corresponding orb of the same color. This right here that you see is basically nothing as it is. But what makes this powerful was that it confirmed this project's mood, its aesthetic, to an extent, and directed us to create what Ep2 is now. If you haven't seen episode 1 of the series that I'm making, well, what you just saw is probably not going to make any sense. So consider checking out that episode. I'll link it in the description. So yeah, this is episode 2 of how we made a small game in Unity, where I'm going to be covering our process of development from just ideas to shipping on Steam. Again, my goal for this series is to focus on how we tackled making this project, with some emphasis on parts of development that some other videos might not really cover that much. Game design has a lot of technical requirements, but there are so many intangibles to getting a project up and running, and I sort of just wanted to share our adventure with that. Also, I'm gonna try the floating head this time, so you'll see my mug popping in and out of it. Other than that, let's get to the game. Well, we had our idea. I didn't go on about ideation last video for no reason. Basically, after a ton of calls and meetings and messaging, a certain someone said, I like the idea of just a giant maze. And that's honestly how the entire concept started. Also, I know I haven't really explained what Ep2 is yet, even in episode 1. Partly because I don't really want to give it all away immediately. I feel like it'll be a little bit more interesting if it sort of just folds out throughout the series. But obviously you can check the Ep2 itch site, which is linked in the description, if you want to see where the project is right now. Anyways, our bottom line, we wanted to make something with a spooky kind of aesthetic, with gameplay that's reminiscent of an escape room somewhat, that was inside of a giant pre-generated labyrinth. And yeah, you're probably thinking, what? I know, we thought about this for a while though. And last episode, I essentially rambled for 8 minutes about how important ideation and concrete ideas are. So I'm going to go over those 3 ideas right now. The 3 key factors to make up our intended experience. 1. A maze environment to traverse and explore. 2. Simple point and click like mechanics for the puzzles. And 3. Multiplayer. More specifically, only 2 players. No more, no less than 2. You could even call it something like a rule of 2. Was that going to work? Was it too hard? Did we want more? You never really know at the very beginning. What we did know is that we were confident enough to make that transition to Unity. Alright, that's kind of the bridge from episode 1 to where we are now. We had our concept, it was clear to all of us, we were confident to move it into Unity. Let's get into how we prototyped this. Alright, that brings us back to whatever this was. Now, honestly, this little scene holds a dear spot in my heart. Although every prototype usually does look like it just got ripped out of the void or something. It started with the maze environment itself, which was easily implemented thanks to Robert and his Maze Magician Unity tool, which can be found on the Unity Asset Store. This was the entire basis of our game. Once that was complete, we needed to mess around with simple point-and-click interactions, which would then turn into the glyphs and the triggers. I have no idea how point-and-click-esque interactions work in other projects, especially from the perspective of first person. In this project, it's essentially slapping a class onto an object that labels that object as interactable. In conjunction with that, the player controller script constantly shoots a raycast in front of the player to check to see if anything has that interactable label. And if it does, then you can click on it and make it do whatever you want. If you're not sure what a raycast is, it's basically a line that you can sort of shoot from one point to another, which can help detect or do different things in your game. Also, no, this is not actual point and click, but think of it as point and click from a first-person perspective, where you can sort of just apply the most basic form of input to change the environment around you. And then, of course, the third and final piece of our minimum tech requirements, the networking. Okay, I'm gonna be real here. I don't know a lot about how the multiplayer works. I know there's a package in our scripts that we use called Mirror, and something about a noble whale. Most importantly for me, I knew that when I was making puzzles and whatnot in the scripts, if there is any command or interaction that I wanted to send to the server and back down to the other player, I had to slap this client RPC command on top of whatever function that I wanted to use. And for the networking part, that's basically it for me. Shout out to some of the other programmers on that one. Also, I should probably mention that this is sort of a special multiplayer. You never actually see the other player. You can only communicate with them through voice chat, and you're expected to figure out how to do the puzzles that way. So, right there, the three pillars. The three concrete, non-changing concepts. Stable foundation that is welcoming for further building. So why is that so important? Why have I made such a strong point of this? Well, prototyping gives you answers fast. It'll tell you what works on a technical and a gameplay basis very quickly. It helps you fail faster, so you can tweak your initial idea and eventually turn that into a working thing. We had such a tight time constraint that moving on from the brainstorming process to making things practical sort of felt like a bit of a gamble. At the same time though, taking any idea and putting it into Unity or Unreal Engine or Godot will always feel like a bit of a gamble because there's just always that little tiny hint of uncertainty. But at the end of the day, a game starts with its foundational mechanics. You have to start somewhere. So, take these three main pillars, bundled them up, we got them into Unity. This is where the project really started to gain some momentum. 2 players in a dark labyrinth, little glowy orbs and glyphs that you could click on and off, and the players, although never seeing each other throughout the entire game, can interact with each other via their own environment. Although we hadn't built any interesting puzzles or interactions yet, this was a huge step for us because we knew that these technical necessities were working. That's essentially the end of the prototype. Next episode, I'm thinking about covering how we use these newly born mechanics and the environment itself to build the experience, and what we did to add the artistic side to wrap it all up into the spooky puzzler it is. To be honest, I thought this episode was going to be a lot longer than the first one, but I guess when it comes to prototyping, there are only a few critical things that you need to remember. Have your ideas clearly laid out. Once you've done that, apply them as soon as you possibly can. And be open to changing if your first application attempt doesn't go the way you wanted it to. If we absolutely could not get the multiplayer to work the way we thought, it would have been changed. And if that didn't work, it actually would have been dropped. Obviously, if there's no time constraint, then you probably won't have to go to an extreme that quickly. I was so lucky to work with people who were open to change if need be. We were able to find that balance between trying really hard to get something to work and changing it just so we could finally get something in there. That line in the middle is a very friendly place. Once again, remember, I am not a professional developer. This is just what's worked for us and what's worked for me in the past. If you completely disagree with me and you feel like you need to give me a piece of your mind, then you're in luck. You actually can. Check out my Twitch channel. You can talk to me in real time. Over there, I live stream game development, multiplayer games, horror games, just regular single player games. So feel free to come chat with me about any of that stuff. Thanks for getting to the end of episode 2. If you liked it, please consider subscribing, liking, all of that YouTube stuff. And we'll see you folks in the next one.